My name is Katherine Holloway, and for years, I let my husband believe he was in control. He smiled for the cameras, played the role of the powerful CEO, and whispered promises to a mistress he thought I didn't know about. But what he didn't realize, I was always 10 steps ahead. The night he walked into our family dinner with his pregnant mistress, he thought he was unveiling his grand plan. But the real plan? That was mine. And by the time the night was over, he'd lose everything. The Holloway estate was glowing under the city skyline, the grand chandelier in the dining hall casting golden light across the mahogany table set for 20. Every year, this dinner was a spectacle, a meeting of family and business, where alliances were strengthened and power was reaffirmed. I had planned every detail, just as I had for the past 15 years. The right wine for each guest, the perfect seating arrangement, conversations that would steer negotiations in my favor without them even realizing it. But tonight was different. Tonight I wasn't just the perfect hostess. I was the executioner. Ethan and Maddie arrived first, my son straightening his tie, my daughter rolling her eyes at the entire affair. They knew their father's arrogance, but had yet to see the depths of his betrayal. Victoria, my mother-in-law, entered next, regal and poised as always. She gave me a knowing look, sensing the undercurrents of tension beneath my smile. "Where's Nathan?" she asked, though I could already hear the answer in her voice. "Running late, as usual," I said smoothly, adjusting the silverware. "But don't worry, he's always been one for grand entrances." And right on cue, the double doors swung open. Nathan walked in, dressed in his perfectly tailored suit, his signature smirk in place. But he wasn't alone. Beside him, clinging to his arm, was her, Isabella Monroe, young, beautiful, and visibly pregnant. The room fell silent. Forks paused midair. Glasses hovered just above the tablecloth. Every pair of eyes darted from Nathan to Isabella and then to me. They were waiting for my reaction, expecting outrage, shock, humiliation. Nathan cleared his throat, his smirk widening as he squeezed Isabella's hand. "Everyone," he announced, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction. "I'd like you to meet Isabella Monroe and the future of the Holloway legacy." Ethan's jaw clenched. Maddie gripped the stem of her glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. I, however, simply smiled. "Miss Monroe," I said, my voice warm and controlled. "Welcome. Please sit beside me, the honored guest seat." Isabella hesitated. Nathan faltered just slightly, his brow furrowing in confusion. This wasn't the reaction he had expected. As she took the seat next to me, I waved to the servers. "Let's begin," I said smoothly, "and bring Nathan his preferred Bordeaux. Tonight is a celebration, after all." Nathan took his seat at the head of the table, but I could feel his eyes on me, searching for signs of distress. He wouldn't find any. Because what he didn't know was that this dinner wasn't his victory. It was his downfall. The first course had been served, and the murmurs around the table had settled into low, controlled conversations. But underneath the clinking of silverware and the polite smiles, the tension was suffocating. Nathan was enjoying himself, sipping his Bordeaux, flashing his trademark smirk, and reveling in the whispers his announcement had caused. Isabella, his pregnant mistress, sat beside me, still slightly stiff, but visibly basking in the attention. I could feel her sneaking glances at me, waiting for some kind of reaction, anger, humiliation, anything. But I gave her none, because the storm hadn't started yet. "Kate, dear," Vanessa Hayes, one of the board members' wives, leaned toward me with a well-practiced smile. "You must be surprised." Ah, there it was. The first real attempt to poke the bear. I took a sip of my water, meeting her gaze with a look of polite amusement. "Surprised?" "No, Vanessa. I always expect Nathan to be theatrical. He does love a grand entrance." Nathan chuckled, swirling his wine. "Well, I couldn't exactly keep a secret this big forever, could I?" He turned his gaze toward the board members, knowing full well where his real audience was. Holloway International is about the future, and my son, our son, will be part of that future. I felt the muscles in Ethan's jaw tighten from across the table. My son never interrupted public affairs, but tonight I could see the restraint in his posture. Maddie, on the other hand, wasn't as composed. She set her fork down just a little too forcefully. "A son?" she said, tilting her head. "So what? Are we being replaced?" Nathan laughed, waving a hand. "Don't be dramatic, Maddie. There's room for all of you." "How generous," she muttered, reaching for her wine glass. The conversation pivoted quickly, as I had intended. Isabella straightened, eager to prove herself. "I was telling Nathan that I think Holloway International has an untapped opportunity in digital luxury spaces," she said, addressing the board. With the right modern approach, we could be targeting younger demographics while maintaining the brand's exclusivity. She was young, ambitious, and undoubtedly intelligent. But she had made one mistake. She thought she was the only one playing the game. "Oh?" I said, smiling warmly. "And how long have you been researching Holloway International's business strategy?" "A little under a year," she admitted, glancing at Nathan. I nodded, dabbing my lips with my napkin. "So, just about as long as you've been sleeping with my husband?" The silence was instant. Ethan's glass froze halfway to his lips. Maddie actually let out a small laugh, half in shock, half in admiration. Victoria sat back in her chair, her expression unreadable. Nathan stiffened. "Kate?" I held up a hand, still smiling. No, it's a fair question. After all, if Isabella is offering insights into our company's future, I think it's important to know her qualifications. Isabella's face flushed, but she recovered quickly. "I graduated top of my class at Stanford," she said. "I've worked with some of the biggest marketing firms in the country. I wouldn't be here if I didn't know what I was doing." "Interesting," I mused, twirling the stem of my wine glass. "And yet Nathan has never once mentioned your professional input in any of our board meetings." I turned to Harold Winters, the chairman. "Harold, have you ever seen her reports?" Harold, an older man who had been my father-in-law's closest advisor, cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "I can't say that I have." I tilted my head. Strange, because according to these documents, I reached into my clutch and pulled out a slim stack of printed papers. Nathan filed a transfer of $3.2 million from the company's discretionary fund under the name Special Projects Advisor. "I assume that's you, Isabella?" Nathan's smirk finally cracked. Isabella blinked. Nathan handled the details. "Of course he did," I said smoothly, placing the papers on the table. "And that would be fine, if it wasn't embezzlement." The word landed like a gunshot. Vanessa Hayes let out a startled gasp. One of the board members actually coughed into his napkin. Nathan's entire body went rigid. I leaned back in my chair. "See, discretionary funds have to be accounted for, Nathan. And when someone tries to funnel millions into a personal account, especially when that account is tied to a mistress." I exhaled, as if in sympathy. "It looks bad." Harold picked up the papers, scanning them quickly, and his face darkened. "Nathan," he said, his voice edged with quiet fury, "this is a serious matter." Nathan was gripping his wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. "This is a misunderstanding," he growled. "Kate, if you think you can." I held up another document. "And then there's the matter of the offshore accounts in Singapore." Isabella's head snapped toward him. "Wait, what?" I nodded sympathetically. "Oh, he didn't tell you?" I slid the document toward her. "Nathan's been moving assets into shell companies under his name alone. Not even yours. He wasn't securing a future for you and the baby, Isabella. He was securing one for himself." The blood drained from her face. "Nathan," she whispered. "He was caught. There was no way out, and he knew it." The board members were already shifting in their seats, calculating the damage, the implications. I could feel the power shifting in the room. I turned to my assistant, who had been waiting silently by the door. "Grace," I said calmly, "please escort Holloway International's legal counsel inside." The doors swung open, and just like that, Nathan's world collapsed. Before we continue this story, I want to connect with all of you, my incredible viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. I know you might be watching this alone, but I want to remind you, wherever you are not alone. At least, not right now. Because I'm here telling this story with you. Nathan's face was a masterpiece of barely contained rage. His smirk had vanished, his fingers tightening around his wine glass, as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. Around the table, the once lively conversation had died entirely. The weight of what I had just revealed was sinking in, pressing down on every single person present. The board members whispered in hushed tones, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. The doors had barely closed behind our legal counsel when Harold Winters, the board chairman, cleared his throat, his voice heavy with authority. "Nathan," he said, his tone measured but firm, "I believe we need an explanation." Nathan's jaw ticked. I knew that look, the one he wore whenever he was caught in a lie but thought he could bluff his way out. "This is ridiculous," he said, shaking his head with forced laughter. "Kate is twisting things to make it look worse than it is." He turned to the board, his hands open, pleading. "Look, I'll admit there have been some financial reallocations, but everything I've done has been for the benefit of Holloway International. These were strategic moves, meant to expand our international reach." Harold's face remained unmoved. Strategic moves? He tapped the documents I had placed before him. Nathan, this isn't a simple transfer of funds. These are direct deposits into private offshore accounts under your sole name. That is not expansion. That is theft. A murmur rippled through the board members. Nathan glanced at me, his eyes burning with barely contained fury. I simply met his gaze with a pleasant smile. Across the table, Isabella was still staring at the document in front of her, her complexion pale. She had stopped pretending to drink her wine. She wasn't touching anything at all. You, her voice wavered as she turned to Nathan, shaking her head in disbelief. You told me we were building something together. You told me everything was in place for us, for the baby. Nathan shot her a glare, his patience thinning. Not now, Isabella. Her lips parted slightly as if he had just slapped her. I almost pitied her, almost. Harold exhaled sharply and leaned back in his chair. This is unacceptable. There are serious legal implications here, Nathan. If these transactions are as fraudulent as they appear, the board will have no choice but to. Nathan slammed his fist onto the table. The glasses trembled. Are we really doing this? His voice rose in barely restrained anger. You're taking her side? His glare shot toward me, filled with pure, unfiltered hatred. She's manipulating you. This is a stunt, a power grab. I tilted my head, feigning amusement. Nathan, darling, I said smoothly, if I wanted power, I would have taken it years ago. His breath hitched. He knew I wasn't. Lying. For years, I had let him play the role of CEO. Let him take the credit. Let him believe he was the mastermind behind our empire. But he never had control. I had simply let him borrow it. I turned to our legal counsel, David Langford, who had been waiting patiently. David, would you mind sharing what we discussed earlier? David nodded and adjusted his glasses. Of course. He set down his briefcase, flipping it open with practiced ease before pulling out yet another document. This is the original corporate trust agreement, written and signed by Richard Holloway before his passing. The mention of Nathan's father instantly darkened his expression. He had spent his entire life trying to live up to the man's name. Now his own father's words would bury him. David continued. Per Richard Holloway's explicit instructions, the majority control of Holloway International was never fully transferred to Nathan Holloway. A new silence fell over the room. It was different this time. Heavier. Nathan's face twisted. That's not possible. I lifted my wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid inside before taking a slow, deliberate sip. Oh, but it is. David tapped the document. According to this, control of the company was placed under a trustee who would oversee all major business decisions. The CEO would act as the public face, but the actual authority. He paused, glancing at me. Was granted to Katherine Holloway. The words hit like a bomb. The shift in the room was palpable. The board members' faces were a mix of shock and realization. Some of them had already known, of course. But others? They were only just now understanding the truth. Nathan had never been in charge. His breath came in sharp, ragged inhales. His entire world had just crumbled, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I leaned forward slightly, my voice softer now, almost sympathetic. You see, Nathan, for years I allowed you to lead. I allowed you to make decisions, to stand in the spotlight, because it was easier that way. I tilted my head. But then, you got greedy. His hands curled into fists. You thought you could steal from the company. You thought you could secure a future for yourself, separate from Holloway International. And worst of all, I let the words settle before delivering the final blow. You thought you could replace me. Across the table, Isabella stiffened. Nathan's face turned a dangerous shade of red. You conniving. Careful, I cut in, my voice still as smooth as silk. There are witnesses. He looked around the room, and he saw it. The board wasn't on his side. His allies were silent. Even his own mother, Victoria, had remained stone-faced throughout it all. There was no saving himself from this. Harold straightened in his seat. Given everything that has been presented tonight, I propose an immediate vote of confidence regarding Nathan Holloway's position as CEO. It happened fast. One by one, the board members raised their hands. Nathan barely had time to process it before Harold delivered the verdict. The vote is unanimous. His gaze hardened. Effective immediately, Nathan Holloway is removed from his position as CEO of Holloway International. Nathan lurched to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. You think you can do this to me? His voice was pure venom. You think I'll just walk away? David Langford closed his briefcase. Security is waiting outside, Mr. Holloway. I suggest you cooperate. Nathan turned to Isabella, desperate now. Izzy, let's go. She didn't move. Isabella, he said, more forcefully this time. Come on. Her lips parted, her gaze flickered to the documents, to the undeniable truth. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. No, Nathan flinched, as if the word had physically wounded him. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them over her stomach. You were never planning to build a life with me, were you? Nathan didn't answer. He didn't have to. She exhaled shakily, then pushed back her chair and stood. I'll find my own way out. And just like that, she left him behind. Nathan looked around wildly, like a man drowning. No one spoke for him, no one moved to help him. For the first time in his life, he had nothing. And I? I simply watched as security entered the room. Nathan's fate was sealed. His legacy was in ruins. His carefully built empire, now fully under my control. As they led him away, he shot me one last furious look. But I only smiled, because I had already won. 1 year later, Holloway International had never been stronger. Stock prices soared, partnerships flourished, and for the first time, I wasn't just the woman behind the empire. I was the one leading it. Nathan? He was nothing but a faded headline. After months of legal battles and failed attempts to reclaim his power, he had disappeared, a forgotten man in a world that no longer cared. The lawsuits drained what little fortune he had left, and without his title, his influence crumbled. Last I heard, he was in Europe chasing investors who wouldn't return his calls. I turned away from the city skyline, my reflection staring back at me from the glass. The office that once belonged to Nathan was now mine, as it always should have been. A knock at the door. Grace stepped inside, a knowing smile on her face. Your guest has arrived. I nodded, smoothing the cuff of my blazer. The past was over. Now it was time to build something even greater. This story isn't just about revenge. It's a lesson in power, patience, and intelligence. Katherine didn't win because she was lucky. She won because she knew when to wait, when to act, and when to strike. It proves that true strength isn't about making noise. It's about making the right moves at the right time. What do you think? If you loved Katherine's masterful takedown, comment 2. If this story wasn't for you, comment 7. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoy stories with powerful twists, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss the next one. More drama, more power plays, and more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.